I've managed to have a professional career, which I haven't followed exactly the template that most people do, but I graduated from law school and got involved fairly shortly thereafter in the enterprise called the Almanac of American Politics, which a college schoolmate, Brandon Schafusa, suggested that I do writing about, which was the description of each state and congressional district of their representatives and senators in Congress and so forth. And I worked on that for about 40 years. Also was in the public opinion polling business, worked in journalism for most frequently for Washington Post, U.S. News and World Report, Washington Examiner more recently, and have written several books that, taken together, sort of form a patchwork of according to my version of American history, if you will. I wrote a book called Our Country, The Shaping of America from Roosevelt to Reagan, which is kind of a narrative political history and with some demographics from 1930 to 1988, and have written a number of books about migrations, internal and immigrant, and in surges of growth in different parts of the country. I got interested in European history as well and British history, and wrote a book on the events generally known as the Glorious Revolution of 1688-89, and had called Our First Revolution, because I think that it proved to be something that was very important for the history and development of the United States, and almost no educated person that I spent time with, except people who were specialists in British history or something, had any idea what this glorious revolution amounted to and the influence it had in American life. I think it was better known in the 19th century. Thomas Macaulay's History of England is about this episode. Very readable, very widely read at that time. Not many people read Macaulay today, so even though he's a lot of fun to read. I decided to write this book. Basically it seemed to me that as it worked out in history, this improbable series of events where William of Orange, the stadtholder of the Netherlands, and a collateral heir of the British crown, stages an army, crosses the English Channel, ousts King James II, who is also his father-in-law and his uncle, and institutes a different order of politics in England. And it's a step forward for representative government, for guaranteed liberties, for global capitalism, and for a foreign policy that consists of opposing hegemonic tyrannies around the world that Britain and then the United States both profit from over time. It's hard to see how the American Revolution would have taken place if the Glorious Revolution had not taken the improbably successful result that it did. I made the point in my lecture here at the Coolidge Foundation, or my little talk, that King James, the king who was ousted, it was in the process of abolishing the colonial legislatures of the British North American colonies. King William, the successful, who ousted King James. Under King William, the colonial legislatures came back into evidence, elected legislatures. And it's there that you see Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and dozens of others involved in the American Revolution get their political education. Their education in politics as the art of the possible. The politics is trying to get a variety of people to get together and embark on the same course, agree on the same course of action, and so forth. The colonies of Spain and of Portugal, colonies of France, didn't have elected legislatures. And in most cases, they've had their revolutions or separations from the colonial power, but they didn't they had more trouble than the United States has had, although the U.S. has had some serious trouble on occasion, more trouble than the United States has had in establishing a workable, democratic republic as we've established it. We have our problems too, but in many ways, the American Revolution and the American Republic have been, by and large, and by a wide margin, a success.
Right. That's amazing. So you mentioned two big areas that the Glorious Revolution has sort of advanced ideas that end up being expressed in the American Revolution. One being it's a step forward in sort of representation and ideas are surrounding that, and then the other is that it's sort of a very practical, William of Orange is willing to allow colonial legislatures, and this is where people start talking about ideas, and self-government becomes a big
self-government becomes a habit.
Right. And so, I'm curious if you think this is it maybe fair to also say that what the Glorious Revolution could do, I mean, this is a largely bloodless revolution, it comes in, it just sort of, through, like you mentioned, a series of very surprising events, takes power.
Oh, it's astonishing.
It's astonishing what happens, right? And I mean, do you think that this was in a lot of ways a proof of concept to people who are in colonial parts of the Great Britain's empire, or something that maybe other empires, colonies weren't able to see?
It's just a series of happenstances. I mean, it comes. The 17th century can be seen as a century of religious wars and European history, right. And colonial history too. Those wars impinge on the European colonial enterprises, and wars about how and where do we get results that amount to toleration of different religions, of free exercise of religion on the part of the people, and connected with that, of course, intimately, because of the importance of religion in people's lives, is freedom of speech. They're knit together in our First Amendment to our Constitution. And the answer is that, you get a sort of settlement, the settlement of the Glorious Revolution in England, Scotland, and Ireland, that were separate kingdoms at that time, and what becomes the United Kingdom eventually, and in the British colonies, points to a solution to which the example of the Dutch Republic was a very important component. And these histories are full of contingent events. When you start trying to write a book about things in the 17th century, you have to deal, first of all, with the fact that England and the continent of Europe were on different calendars. So that I had to make little columns of things that happened. This is November 5th in England, but it's November 15th in Europe, or vice versa, and so forth.
Not easy.
Yeah. Well. Then the other thing is that people, the political actors, the military forces, the political people, they had to act with, they didn't have the communications devices that we have. They didn't have the telephone. They didn't have even the primitive telephones that I grew up with in the 1950s, You had to dial, you placed a long distance call with an operator and things. You didn't have any of that. People were acting on the basis of very much more incomplete information than political actors have to deal with today, the chances that they took as a result of that are pretty astonishing, and you're dealing with people with a mindset where monarchy is sort of the default form of government, but you're dealing, with the Dutch. The Dutch have a republic in the 17th century. Britain had England had a republic for a while under Cromwell in the 1640s and 50s, and decided to go back to monarchy, or that was the result of the restoration of King Charles II in 1660. You know, these things advance in different ways and depend on the actions of individual people, of great masses, um, economic, scientific developments, and so forth, of which we, I think, are the lucky beneficiaries. I mean, you know, some people say, well, you shouldn't be, you know, a chauvinist. You think that your civilization is the greatest. The advances that we made in this country are superior and so forth. You're just suggesting that you're particularly wonderful and better than people in the rest of the world. I think that we as Americans are the lucky beneficiaries of a lot of achievements of people in the past and of people who have gone through terrible tragedies and difficulties and lost their lives, their liberties, their fortunes, their freedom, and so forth. We're the lucky beneficiaries, and we have a responsibility, I think, to carry on in a way that improves the good fortunes that we have inherited.
Right. And you mentioned that it's not even just a tribute to the people of the past, but also cultures outside of ours, Dutch influence, British influence, I mean, Scottish, right? So there's certain ideas coming in from all sorts of different groups of people. And so looking at just one in particular, looking at the religious toleration, do you think that the Dutch, you know, that William of Orange coming to doing the Glorious Revolution, this inserts it into, you know, the British Empire and therefore colonial mindset? Do you think that there's something unique about what the Dutch were doing in regards to toleration?
Well, as I understand it, out of the 16th, 17th century Dutch revolt against the overlordship of Spain, which is a whole complex series of events too. You know, any attempt to summarize it gets rid of a lot of complexity and so forth. They kind of developed. They had been an advanced economy in what is now the Netherlands and Belgium. They were one of the really advanced commercial economies in Europe, and manufacturing economy, manufactured of cloth. I mean, you know, the Flanders, the coastal area along Holland, Flanders, what are the coastal areas of current Netherlands and Belgium, were the area where one of the two big cloth areas, the other is around Tuscany, around Florence in northern Italy. And, you know, the people in the Dutch and Flanders, and the people in the Flemish, imported wool from an underdeveloped country called England that was backward and didn't, you know, rural and so forth. The English, you know, the Lord Chancellor, at least until Tony Blair abolished these offices, sat on something in the House of Lords called the wool sack. Pillow made out of with wool, stuffed with wool. Wool was the great export, the British things. The Dutch got started with herring. They were the people that found and figured out how to preserve the herring in the North Sea and selling it all over the Baltic to Germany, to France, to England, and so forth. And on herring, they built an economy that does all sorts of other commercial things, living in this marshland under sea level and so forth. So these things develop in different ways, and you can go through all, you know, how did the Spanish come to own the Netherlands? You know, that's a long story. But
what do you think? You know, like you're mentioning, there's this huge tapestry of ideas, of background, of all these countries with their practices, their customs, their economies, and what do you think are some of the most understudied parts? What do you think that you would want students today to know about our founding? Where are we coming from? Things that we don't necessarily think of right now.
Well, of course, I would suggest that they read my books. I mean, I'll plug my latest book, Mental Maps of the Founders, which is an essay on 6 essays on 6 of the founding fathers and their geographic image. I've always been a maps guy. I like to know about maps and about where people are from and things like that. And the maps of the of these things, and you have these very different sort of examples. So, you know, it's you know, Tom Hamilton says if you look at the United States, on the left side you have Canada, and on the right, on your right hand, you have the Spanish Empire. Well, where are you standing and what are you looking at if you do that? You're looking at the Atlantic Ocean. You're looking at these invisible lines, trade lines of commerce going across the Atlantic Ocean. This is Hamilton's mental map. If you look for Thomas Jefferson's mental map, you get the first edition of his book, Notes on Virginia, in which he includes a map at the front that was based on the map that his father, Peter Jefferson, a surveyor, had made in the 1750s, a map that George Washington in his early travels relied on, by the way, relied on Peter Jefferson's map. And Jefferson, the map doesn't include New England, no New England at all, not much of the Atlantic coast. It looks west out past the Mississippi River, which is at that point the western boundary of the United States. And Jefferson tells you how far it is, and he gets the numbers pretty much right go from Santa Fe to Mexico City. He's looking ever westward. Hamilton is looking out over the Atlantic Ocean. Right. Should it be a surprise, therefore, that they have different visions about what American public policy should be in the 1790s and how that should set up financial institutions and taxes and things and land distribution? And should it be a surprise that they take different sides in what is a world war between revolutionary France and royal and commercial Britain, right, and so forth, with Hamilton basically favoring Britain and Jefferson imprudently, to the point of imprudence, favoring France, and so forth. Well, they have different mental maps, different ideas. So the answer is, you know, I've tried to write these little books that sort of my vision of American development over time. And I've had a central vision that, contrary to what the New Deal historians have taught, Americans have been divided politically more often along cultural than along economic lines, though those have also been a factor in our politics and our political and cultural development. And that we have had cultural variety from the very beginning of the British colonies and so forth. You know, people treat this these days as if we just suddenly had ethnic or cultural variety. No, we've had it for a long, long time. So, right, you know, these are the things that the themes that I've been going through. So there's always more to learn, and one of the things we've had with the founders over the last 25 years is wonderful writers writing very good things about it. And I think we need, you know, we may need a little bit more of writing about other subjects. My book, Our Country, The Shaping of America from Roosevelt to Reagan, I start with a beginning piece, America, what did America look like in 1930, from the point of view of two political actors that did not live to see the 1930s. William Howard Taft, who'd been president and then was Chief Justice, and Charles F. Murphy, the head of New York's Tammany Hall, died in 1924. Taft died in 1930. They didn't know there was a Great Depression. They didn't know there was going to be a New Deal. They didn't know all these other things. What did the country look like? And I thought, and what did our politics look like? And I thought it was interesting to look at that because it's a counterpoint to the New Deal historians, right, Arthur Schlesinger, William Leuchtenberg, or others, who are wonderful writers. They're a pleasure to read. They write beautiful prose. But they tell a one-sided story. They talk about the 1920s as a period, and Calvin Coolidge's presidency included, as a period of Americans having a party, a wild binge, capitalism going wild. The natural, inevitable, and deserved result, they suggest, is the Great Depression of the 30s and the New Deal and so forth. I think that gets a lot of the history wrong. And I think that it's useful to think about the 1920s, to think about the years of the Coolidge presidency, 1923 to 29, as a unit by themselves where the country, it's a period when the country, got refrigerators, radios, and automobiles.
Right.
That's like three big differences. I mean,
Yeah.
my grandparents were born in the 1880s and 1890s. They grew up when there were no airplanes anywhere.
Right.
They grew up when there were basically no automobiles within their line of sight. The idea of radio was utterly fantastic to them, and so forth. The idea that you'd have a refrigerator that you could plug in and keep a piece of meat safe to eat for more than a day
Yeah.
was something that simply did not exist, and so forth. So those were major changes in people's lives, huge material changes that also were accompanied by more in the way of intellectual progress and activity than is generally conceded. That is certainly suggested. The New Deal historians have one way of looking at history. It presents, you learn some things from that. Some of it is valid and valuable. But I think that, I've tried to present
New perspective.
something of an alternative perspective in my different books. The one long political narrative and these other shorter books, the development of the political parties and so forth.
Amazing.
And so forth. So, in many, I just kind of followed the advice of Luke Cannon, the great political reporter, Washington Post reporter on Ronald Reagan. And he covered him back with the San Jose Mercury News before he was governor. And Lou told me one time, he said, if you want to really learn about a subject, write a book about it. So that's what I've tried to do. And what I'd suggest to people is to do something I find myself not doing as much as I would like to today. Get off your phones, get off your iPad, your tablets, or whatever the latest thingy is. Yeah, the goggles you're supposed to wear or something like that. And spend a weekend reading a book. I think like the winter before last, I read. I thought, well, I'm gonna read Thomas Mann's Buddenbrooks. Each weekend I was reading some of Buddenbrooks, and then I got Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov. Just take some great books and spend all your time doing that. Amazing. Young people fool around too much in their college or in those years and don't concentrate enough. Then if people get married and have children, well, you don't have much time to read when you have small children.
This is the time when you're young.
And so forth. So get in some reading beforehand and just spend some time on these kind of things and learn more about it. And do it with the point of view that, my gosh, we are fortunate to be where we are in history compared to what's gone on before.
Right.